I wanted to come and say a few words about your next reading assignments, but before I do that, I'd like to thank you for your posts on Gilgamesh. There were some exceptionally beautiful responses, some really stellar responses, and I encourage everyone to read, when you have a chance, the work of your colleagues. It can be very, very exciting, and I think everyone will gain insight from each of the posts that you made. All right, so we're now turning from our reading of Gilgamesh, the very ancient epic of Gilgamesh, with an anonymous author, right? We don't know the author of Gilgamesh, to the Bible, and particularly to a few chapters in the Old Testament. We'll be reading chapters 1 through 3, right, which are really encompass Genesis, chapter 4, the Cain and Abel story, and we could say book chapters 6 through 9, which comprise the story of the flood. These are works that many of you may be familiar with, and many others may have no experience with at all. But since we're turning from Gilgamesh to the Bible, I thought it was especially important to say something about the nature of the approach to this text we are going to take here. Some of you may be people of faith, and or I should say faiths, and I respect deeply all faiths. Right? All faiths concern the asking, right, of very large questions about the nature of human existence, as does humanism itself, right? All faiths, and also things that we wouldn't ordinarily consider faiths, sometimes come to these very large questions. But our goal for this moment, right, and this reading of the Old Testament, is to see the Bible as a text, right, to see it as literature. And this is very, very important, right? And I always find that it's one of the most interesting units that we do, right? And one of the most interesting texts that we look at. But that it's also a very difficult text to look at, because so many people have an experience of it and believe that they know what it means. I want you to imagine for a moment, if you're in that position, that you don't know. Right, that you are approaching this text, this extremely complex text, as something new to you. For one thing, I want you to know something about the history of the text, its origins, and its transmission history. Right, this is a text that is 3,000 years old, but it has a 3,000 year, at least 3,000 year transmission history. That's a very, very long time. And I want you to know something about what was happening to it, right? How it was formed, how the books came to be in the arrangement that they are now. Rather than thinking of it, right, as something that was produced all at once and here it is, a fait accompli. Right? That's not how the Bible as a text comes into being, right? And to understand that transmission history is to understand something very, very essential about the nature of textual development. I also want you to treat it as a literary text, in the sense that when you look at it, when you begin to interpret it, you're looking at it to understand its structure. Right? You're looking at the deep imagery in the text. You're looking at the tensions, the dynamics within that text. And of course, you're also looking at this text in translation, right? Because unless you are reading the Bible in the original language in which it is composed, right, we're reading it as a translation. And so that too, right, the question of what is gained and what is lost in that translation may be very, very important to your encounter with the Bible. Your responses then should really reflect this kind of literary approach, right? This literary approach to the Bible. This is not to say, though, and I want to emphasize this because it sounds like a contradiction, but I hope I can explain it well enough. This is not to say that I expect your responses to the texts to be simply academic, right? To be simply sort of very straightforward explications of the biblical texts that we're looking at. Of course, right? There's something can be something more to these responses, and I want you to follow the example, if you can, of the midrashic scholars. And I do talk a little bit about Midrash in the lecture, and I'd like you to look at that section on Midrash carefully, right, and see what it means. What does it mean to do a kind of Midrashic analysis? The people that involved in these analyses are generally people of faith, but they're also people who question, right, who look at the text not as a text that's completely revealed to them in some obvious simplistic way, right, but as a text that requires that we encounter it and that we struggle with it. When you read Genesis, right, when you read the story of the fall, when you read the story of Cain and Abel, and when you read the story of the flood, understand, right, the extraordinary power of those stories, whether we believe them in a literal way or whether we see them as stories with figurative significance. They make us question certain things about the nature of our relationship to the world in which we live, right, and to the Creator, if we believe in a Creator who made us. They are hard texts, right, and there are things in these texts that are both beautiful and also very disturbing. And as you read, right, and I think it's particularly hard to do this when you know a story, but read with your mind open to both the beauties and the terrors of these texts. When you write about these texts, right, I do want you to tell me something about their history. I want you to be able to talk about them as literature. And in the best responses, right, I want you to be able to encounter them and to think about the tensions and both the beautiful nature of these texts and also the extremely problematical nature of the texts. Emily Dickinson, a writer I'm deeply familiar with, once said that faith is doubt. And I believe that what she was suggesting was that we're required throughout our lives, right, to engage in a process of continual questioning. Do that in your responses, and I think you will have some marvelous experiences of the text, and that marvel, that wonder, and also that, in some senses, fear or terror will be pronounced in your responses. So I look forward to what you have to say, and I thank you very much for the work that you've done already. You're off to a very, very good start. Thank you so much. And as always, of course, if you have questions, please write them down. You can put them in questions about this course, or if they're of a more private nature, you can always email me. I'm standing by to help you in every way I can. And that includes, of course, that if you wish to meet with me on FaceTime or Skype or some other way, that you are always welcome to make an appointment. All right, take care and happy reading. And happy Labor Day, too. I hope you're not laboring. Take care.